And joining us on our Newsmaker line, Senator Marco Rubio, who said this week that the Senate immigration bill is not going to stop the border surge. Senator, welcome back. How are you?
Good. How are you, John?
You know, I know you took a lot of heat, and you have since broken with the, I guess, what was it, Gang of Eight at the time, and you were trying to get a solution to our border problem. It's now worse than it's ever been. I was down by the Rio Grande last week. I don't know if you...
I saw part of the special, yeah.
And while down there, I got a briefing, Senator, and in this briefing, I learned that people were coming from Yemen and Syria and Pakistan, Afghanistan, and I also saw, they put up on the screen, a pie chart, and in 7 years, in the state of Texas alone, 642,000 crimes, everything from murder and rape and robbery and kidnapping, to more petty crimes and drug dealing. 642,000 crimes committed against Texas citizens by illegal immigrants. And it's getting worse. We now see what's going on here.
Yeah, I have a couple points to make. First of all, I still believe that the immigration system that we have in place today doesn't work and needs to be fixed. But the situation we're facing now on the border is the first part of that, and that is that we do not have, and there's two things going on here. One is we do not have in place in certain sectors of the border in particular, including the one you were in last week, don't have in place the infrastructure you need to protect the sovereignty of this country from unlawful incursion or from people crossing over. Added to that is this dynamic that we're seeing now, and you have seen this massive surge in unaccompanied minors and others crossing the border that is directly related to the decision made in 2012 by the president to defer action for those under a certain age who were in this country, in essence to put in place the DREAM Act through executive order. And since he did that, you have seen this dramatic surge that now approximates 60,000 people in the first 6 months and 2 weeks of this year. And that problem is being driven 100% by the perception and reality that if you arrive in this country from El Salvador, Honduras, or Guatemala as a minor, you're going to get to stay. You're going to be released to relatives that are living here, particularly if they happen to be your parents. And the truth is your chances of staying are extremely high. In some instances, as many as 70% of people who travel in that demographic are being allowed to stay, despite the fact that the law says that they shouldn't be allowed to stay permanently. That's the fact. And that's what's driving it. These folks are calling home, and they're telling people we made the journey, we're here, and we're living out in society, and that's just driving more people to do this.
Why
that's simple.
The president complains a lot about Republican obstructionism, but and says he's reached across the aisle. I have yet to really see any real evidence of this, but it seems to me that there are two things that I would think Republicans and Democrats could agree on and should agree on as it relates to the current crisis, and more broadly, if we don't control our borders. When I was down there and I'm hearing people are coming from Pakistan, Syria, Afghanistan, and Yemen, I'm a little concerned. What are their intentions coming into this country?
Well, I don't know what all of their intentions are, certainly. But first of all, that's not a new dynamic. That's actually been happening for a while. I mean, people read and they hear the story about how people are crossing, and they realize, well, I can cross too. So they know where the sectors are on the border that are not secure, and certainly people from all over the world are making that journey. Here's the bottom line. We know for a fact, and I'm not claiming to have any information that any of those folks have crossed so far, but I can tell you for a fact that there are terrorist groups all over the world that are seeking to entry into the United States so they can carry out attacks and operations here. And that's always been a concern, a national security concern, and the border is a big part of that. So it is a national security issue first and foremost that we should be deeply concerned about. And you asked about the president. The president went down to El Paso a few years ago and gave a speech about how the border was secure and mocked those.
Well, Harry Reid said it today. It said it yesterday.
And of course the evidence is that that's not the case, of course. And but as far as this particular issue that we're facing right now, this mass migration, it is being driven 100% in my mind, or 90% in my mind, by the reality that people know that if they can come here, they're going to get to stay.
Senator, there are two things that I think that the president, Republicans, and Democrats could agree on. One is this provision that was designed in 2008 to prevent the sex trafficking of kids from Central America. That is now being used. That's why these kids from Central America, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador are being treated differently than kids from Mexico, and why the president's asking for $3.7 billion. Couldn't we get rid of that provision immediately? And number two, instead of spending $1.8 billion on housing people that belong back, kids that belong back with their parents, why don't we spend that on the border? Because I could tell you, having been down there last week, there is a massive portion of this border that is nowhere near secure.
Well, a couple things, sir. I agree with you on that. I think that if you're in favor of immigration reform, if anyone, no matter where you are on this position, then you should be in favor first of securing the border, because if you don't do that, you have zero chance of doing any other part of the immigration issue that needs to be confronted. The second second point you raise about parents being reunited with children, the fact of the matter is that many of these children, their parents are already here in the United States. They've been working here, raising money here, and sending it back to pay these groups that are trafficking the children across the border. That's one of the things that's driving this. This is largely a word-of-mouth phenomenon. What's happening is people are calling back home and telling people, we made the journey, and you should be encouraged. You should think about doing it yourself as well. As far as repealing the law, that's the right thing to do. It's actually the humanitarian thing to do at this stage, because in the absence of that, we are creating an incentive for more people to send their kids on this very dangerous journey. But as you've seen already, Senate Democrats have been pretty clear that they're not going to support that change. So we've got a real struggle on our hands here. The last point that you raised is the right one, and that's one I've been saying. We're not shouldn't just be throwing $3 billion at this thing and call it a day. I mean, I think we should use this as an opportunity to put in place permanent enforcement mechanisms that are going to prevent this from happening in the future. And that doesn't just mean border security. That means interior enforcement things like E-Verify, hopefully, and an entry-exit tracking system for visa overstays.
You have sort of you've broken with this immigration bill that was passed by the Senate, and I remember speaking to you at the time, and I remember you being heavily criticized at the time. And you said that it was never the bill that you would want passed, but you were trying to work with the Democrats. Where are you now on this? Where do you...
a couple points. The first of all, the Senate was going to move on immigration reform with or without me, and I had the opportunity, which I still don't regret taking, to try to influence it. If you recall, at the time, they wouldn't even talk about border security in conjunction with other things, and we were able to get them to accede to that. So I think that's a given for any future effort, that you're going to have to do the border first. You also recall during that debate that I consistently, over and over again, said, unless the border security stuff happens, and it happens first, it's going to be very impossible to get this passed. You're not going to get the votes out of the House, and you're not going to get the support of the American people. Every time I would say that, Democrats and some in the media would say, oh, Rubio's trying to back out, Rubio's getting cold feet. I was telling the truth, and now we've seen the proof. And here's the bottom line. No matter how you feel about immigration, you will not be able to pass anything on immigration in this country. You will never have the votes in Congress to pass anything on immigration until you first put an end to and reverse this illegal immigration problem that we have. People are not willing to discuss, consider, or have a debate about anything else until this problem has been addressed first and foremost. And that's what I said consistently during that process, and that's proven to be right.
You know, you have, and I agree wholeheartedly with you. I was down there, and my observations, and I know you've been down to the border a number of times, and I think this was my 8th or 9th trip down there, everywhere from the Rio Grande straight across through San Diego. I was in San Diego in a drug warehouse, all the drugs that they've been able to capture from drug dealing and cartels. I saw an office building where a tunnel had been dug from Mexico all the way through up until a San Diego office building. I mean, I saw a lot. And I was out on horseback, helicopter, boat, all-terrain vehicles. By the way, I nearly fell off the horse. Yeah, don't laugh. It was pretty bad.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot, and what I've learned is this. When the border agents, they're willing to do their job. When they make a decision that they're going to cordon off a specific, say, 10-mile area, they do it with perfection. In other words, there's no way one person is crossing that border illegally when they have the manpower, boots on the ground to do it. The question is, as a country, do we have the will to do this? Why is there this mysterious reluctance and resistance, knowing that we are having people wanting to enter the country from Syria, Yemen, et cetera?
Well, part of it is that's one of the reasons why I support reform, is because the first reform we have to have is border security reform, and that means having the infrastructure in place. You know, there's such a thing as, you probably saw it when you were there, strategic fencing. Strategic fencing is used to close off specific geographic areas so the border agents can focus with manpower on the other areas. We just don't have enough of that being employed, and if you talk to the governors, they'll tell you we're not getting enough resources sent our way to enforce the law. And then here's the other thing that people don't necessarily pay attention enough to. About 40%, over 40% of the people in this country illegally did not cross the border illegally. They came on an airplane, they came on a, whatever it may be, on a visa. The visa expired, and they stay. That's almost half of our illegal immigration problem. And we don't know who they are, because we track people when they enter, but we never measure whether they left or not. That needs to be dealt with. And then the other aspect of it is E-Verify. You know, the magnet that's drawing people here is jobs. And if you have a system in place where employers have to verify that who they're hiring is legally here, you would diminish greatly the magnet that's drawing people. You have to do all three of those things. In the absence of doing those three things, providing the resources you need for the border, an entry-exit tracking system to prevent visa overstays, and an E-Verify system to cut off the magnet, until you do those three things, we're going to have an illegal immigration problem in America.
You know, I was with Governor Perry out on the Rio Grande and up in the air, and he kind of convinced me. He made a pretty compelling case, because I've always believed that you should just build the double fencing across the entire border. He doesn't think it's doable. He thinks it's not it's not the best value or bang for our buck. He thinks it's boots on the ground, surveillance cameras, predator drones is the answer. I think as long as it works, I don't really care. But I do know that if we do put the manpower there and we give them the technology, that we could literally see every square inch at any given moment of the border, I'm pretty sure we can do it.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that I pushed on, and as you call, was criticized about the bill, that it didn't, it spent too much money at the end doing those sorts of things. But there's no doubt there are areas that need fencing, and there are areas that are better done through cameras, sensors, manpower, and patrols. And we need to do both. Right now, the law doesn't have that in place. So at a minimum, that needs to be done. And as I tell people that are in favor of immigration reform, if you want any sort of conversation about the rest of it, you've got to support this, because that's the only way you're ever going to have the vote.
Are you now at the point where you are border security first, verifiable, wholly secure before anything else should be dealt with immigration?
Yeah, that my preference always was to be done in a sequential order. That's not the direction the Senate went, but even during that debate, even when the bill was being drafted, I consistently said, and that's what I was alluding to earlier, I consistently said, if we don't do more on the border and we don't do it in a way that's verified and has people's confidence, you're not going to have the support for the rest of this. And, of course, every time I would say that, the media would say, oh, he's backing out. But the truth is I was stating the obvious, and now we've seen it be true. But my preference for this has always been that it be done sequentially. In essence, that you first do the security elements, and when that's taken care of, then you move to modernizing the legal system. And then the third step, after you do those other two, is you deal with the illegal immigration problem that we have. You can't get to step 3 until you get to step 1 and 2 first. And that's how I wrote a piece early last year in the Wall Street Journal that outlined the sequential process.
But you won't support anything other than securing the border first at this point, because you kind of felt a little burnt, if I remember the last time.
But that's not the reason why. I mean, the truth of the matter is that that's the only way this will ever happen. I mean, we've now spent 15 years in this country in a deadlock over this issue. The problem's only gotten worse. I mean, there are some, not doing anything is not a good option either, because you're freezing in place.
Hey, if we secure the border first, then you know what? It's like a boat that's taken on water. You plug up the hole, and then you bail out the water, and you deal with the other issues.
Yeah, let me ask you this. It's the only reasonable way to do it. If you don't do it that way first, you're never going to have the support that you need to do the rest of it. People just don't want to hear about it. They don't want to talk about it. You're wasting everyone's time. And quite frankly, it's a better way to do it, because as we're seeing here now, just the specter of reform, or the idea that there might be a reform, allows these trafficking groups to go back to people and say to them, hey, there's this special law in America that you're going to get to stay, but you have to do it right now.
Well, let me ask you this, because the president wouldn't go to the border, and then, of course, we have Sergeant Andrew Tamarisi rotting down there in a Mexican jail because he made a wrong turn and turned himself in.
Yeah, the one person we want to see cross that border, the Mexican government's not allowing to cross. And that's something that I wish they pay more attention to. His family's in Florida. It's an issue we've been engaged with them on quite a bit. We're encouraged that he has better legal representation now. But again, the criminal justice system in Mexico, I think, leaves, at least with regards to this case in particular, much to be desired.
In my opinion, the president needs to speak out. He had an opportunity. He was speaking to the Mexican president. All right, last question. You recently said you could beat Hillary if you were running for president. You're going to have to make a decision here within the next year about whether or not you're going to run, actually probably sooner, right?
Well, I think a number of people have in that debate in their own minds about what the right step is. Look, I just think that the country is going to have an opportunity to get this right here over the next few years, and then I think if we don't, we're going to be the first generation to need to leave the next worse off, or we're going to have another American century. Those are our two choices. And what I need to do is decide, through working with my family and praying about it, is where's the best place for me to further that agenda at this stage. As far as Hillary Clinton is concerned, I don't know what she's going to run on. She'll be a continuation of Obama's policies. Is she going to run on foreign policy when the foreign policy she helped be an architect of is completely in shreds and has left our country in tremendous danger and diminished in the eyes of the world? I mean, name me one foreign policy success of this administration before or after her?
I can't. All right. So is it fair to say this, that you are given serious consideration to running?
Sure. I think that that's right. And in 2016, I'm up for re-election in Florida, so I have to make that decision anyway. But I certainly will think deeply and pray a lot about whether the right place to do that from the White House.
When do you think the timing is for such a decision? Is it?
Well, I think someone who wants to run for president of the United States would have to have that decision made internally over the next few months, and certainly would have to announce something publicly in the early part of next year.
And I think making the announcement on my show should be a promise.
Sure. I mean, millions of people. Listening.
Can I take that as a yes then?
Yes, what? That I'll come on your show and do something?
And announce it.
Yeah, but not today.
No, not. All right, Senator. It's great to hear from you again.
Thanks,
Thank you
Sean.
so much, and
Thanks
we'll be paying very close attention. Thank you.